what exactly makes money money? Uh, well, if you look it up on Wikipedia, you'll find the standard microeconomics answer. It's a medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. Medium of exchange means that people use it to buy and sell goods and services. It's more useful than, say, barter. Unit of account means that it's numerical. You can divide it into smaller units, merge those units back into a bigger unit. It's fungible. Every piece of money is the same amount. It's easy to count your money. Third, it's a store of value, which means if you have your money in a particular currency, it will store your value for you and it won't arbitrarily go up or down. Of course, there are interdependencies within these. For example, how many of you have heard of Bitcoin? This is a P2P based exchange network that fosters a virtual currency which is based solely on the ability to of the network to guard against double spends and such like that. Basically, it is scarce. It could be money. There's nothing saying that it can't be money. They are scarce. It's hard to produce bitcoins. You need a lot of computing power in order to displace everyone else mining for bitcoins. But then, obviously, that doesn't make it money. Sure, it's a very good store of value for bitcoins. Because, if you have 50 bitcoins today, you're going to have 50 bitcoins tomorrow. But it's not a medium of exchange. And if it's not a medium of exchange, then it can't be a store of value because fundamentally, if you can't take those 50 bitcoins and use those to buy, say, a new computer or 10 million pizzas or what have you, then you really can't say that your value has been stored because you can't use that value. You can't get it out. So it's fundamentally useless. Now, of course, there are businesses that are starting to accept bitcoins, and that situation is getting better. And I'm hoping that Bitcoin network eventually becomes actually accepted. But I needed an example to show that basically, to any nation state which has its own fiat currency, obviously it's backed solely by its ability to be a medium of exchange and a store of value. If you print $10 million, well, actually no, $10 million isn't a lot. If you print like $10 trillion a year, you would expect eventually the currency will be worth less, and people might lose their confidence. They might stop exchanging this medium, meaning that it stops being a store of value and people pull out. Now, fundamentally, this means that the U.S. currency, in order to be a reserve currency, which it is, it has to be backed by the ability to exchange it for goods and services. So, for example, people use the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. In fact, when other currencies hyperinflate, the typical reaction is first to go to barter and then second to go to U.S. dollars. And that's been the reaction in, say, Zimbabwe and several other countries. It's already 4 minutes. But yeah, basically, the U.S. government, in order to basically ensure that people continue transacting in U.S. dollars and it still stays valuable, they have to ensure that people are willing to transact in U.S. dollars. Wait, they have to make. No, in order to make sure it's still a reserve currency, they have to make sure that people will transact in U.S. dollars, and in order to do that, they need to ensure that there are goods and services provided by people that only take U.S. dollars. So fundamentally, what does the U.S. make? Nothing. We've completely destroyed our manufacturing base. The only thing I can think of is high-tech semiconductor production, which can't be moved to China because it's very hard to enforce patents and copyrights and things like that, so the businesses stay here. But even then, once the products are actually made, they get assembled in China, just because then there's no copyright to steal. So we what do we still make? Well, there's petrodollar finance, where basically all the major oil bourses are denominated in U.S. dollars, which means if you want to buy oil, and you do want to buy oil because it is the basis of the U.S. economy. I mean, no, it's the basis of all economies, not just U.S. economies. Oil is the basis of the whole economy, and therefore, if you want to buy oil, you have to have U.S. dollars. Therefore, the U.S. has this immense amount of control over the economy through their ownership of the U.S. dollar. So, you may have been aware that we went into Iraq because, they say it was a war for oil. It was not a war for just the oil in Iraq. It was a war to make sure that Iraq did not sell oil for euros, because that's what Saddam Hussein wanted to do. He announced it about a couple months before we invaded Iraq. In fact, Libya, Gaddafi said he wanted to create an oil bourse denominated in gold. Something those little libertarian gold bugs would like sometime. But yeah, basically, petrodollar warfare is used primarily to keep our reserve currency a reserve currency. It's basically to ensure that our economy is the basis of the world economy. That is why China continues to sell to us, when they could be using all their machines to produce goods for themselves at much cheaper prices. Now, of course, that is called petrodollar warfare. What else? What other kind of dollar warfares would we have? Well, what else do we produce? Fundamentally, our only export is culture. U.S. culture is taking over the rest of the world. Other countries generally don't export their culture. The closest thing is Japan, and that's only been very recently because of the Japanese cartoon fandom in the U.S., the anime fandom, has pushed very hard, in some cases even violating copyright, to translate stuff themselves to get those works over here. And you have Nintendo, which for a very long while established Japanese dominance over the entire gaming market. That's starting to change with high-def gaming and the Japanese inability to produce graphically complex games. But basically, other than that, every other country tends to import U.S. films, and U.S. films only. Very rarely we'll see something come out of Britain, and even then we end up remaking it. So we fundamentally control human culture, and human culture is a product thanks to copyright. If you want to import U.S. culture into your home country, and you do because U.S. culture is now human culture, you have to pay for licensing. And what is that licensing paid for in? U.S. dollars. And so with that, we come to Protect IP and this S bill, which I forgot. I think it's S978. But yes, the bill I ranted about earlier, and Protect IP, and the DMCA, and all these other big copyright bills, they fundamentally exist as a function of copyright dollar warfare. We have a copyright-backed dollar. Other than the oil. Even if the oil were to be gone, we could still whore ourselves out based on our culture. That's why Joe Biden goes up and says, well, copyright, these people in China, we have to sign ACTA because these people in China are going and taking our stuff, and all this other crap. Heck, I remember when Obama was running, he actually talked with Larry Lessig, who was calling for copyright reform. Now, of course, copyright reform is not going to happen unless there is such a serious change in the makeup or functioning of the Senate and the House that they would have to start actually considering radical ideas. Yes, copyright reform is radical. You're about as radical as a socialist because you're essentially promoting the downfall of a large corporation, and that puts you in the same camp as the socialists or the libertarians, or the Greens, you're politically marginal. Because, again, without that copyright, what is our money good for? How are we going to force people to transact in US dollars when, say, eventually, we'll make a hypothetical, let's say the oil people in these third world countries with all the oil in them decide we're going to transact in euros or some other currency. Let's say because Ben Bernanke's been printing way too much US dollars, of course. And so basically that means the only thing left with the US dollar is, well, all of the existing content licensing agreements are in US dollars. Therefore, without content licensing and oil, there's nothing really for some, say, country that wants to store value. They want to have their value stored in something that's also a very good medium of exchange. And if the US dollar fails to be a good medium of exchange, then they won't put their money in it, and the US government loses a lot of power. It's just mind-boggling. All these various power structures, corporate, government, they all tie together. Gee, I sound like a conspiracy theorist sometime. But basically, that's why the US government continues trying to destroy the internet. Because the internet does not have the political connections, and fundamentally, the internet is not something we can maintain a hold on like we can human culture. Human culture, we've managed to maintain a hold on through neocolonialism, through copyright and patents. Well, mostly copyright. Patents are more inventions, but you can patent human culture in certain cases. I won't go into those. But basically, I really just want to get that point through. The US government is not stupid. They're doing this to protect Hollywood, which creates exports, one of our last few exports that no other country can provide because of our cultural status. Therefore, in order to maintain US control over the economy, and because we're not going to try and whore ourselves out like China or some of these smaller countries which are actually taking business from China, because then obviously we'd have to make people work for pennies, and we'd be edging in on China's turf, and it wouldn't work. So our only recourse is more wars for oil, more copyright bills.